Hello and warm greetings. Welcome to the Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi, where we would try to comprehensively analyze 7 articles in 2 different sections. In the analysis part, we'll first have a comprehensive discussion with respect to the serious public health issue of drug menace in the country, the government initiatives, and the way forward. Then, in the second article, we'll have a discussion with respect to the Hooch Tragedies, that is, the deaths due to illicit liquor and the biological mechanism involved. Then, in the simplified section, we'll have a look at 5 different articles from a special perspective of UPSC Prelims 2025 along with the validation. So stay tuned. Coming to the very first topic of today's discussion, this is with respect to combating drug abuse. In the last few decades, what we have observed is that there has been the rising menace of drug abuse across the country. And there are multiple reasons for that. For example, the changing cultural norms, more towards the westernization, what we call as modernity. Now, what we have to understand is that this has grave implications on the overall social sphere, on the health of the individuals. Also, it is compromising the very demographic dividend of the country, the young population. In that regard, we have the Mewat region in Haryana, which has adopted a new approach, that is a sports-driven approach to combat the drug abuse. Now, what we are going to do today is we look at the whole picture comprehensively. We'll see what is the extent of the drug abuse in the country, what are the underlying causes, what are the consequences, what have been the government initiatives, and what can be the way forward. Believe me, it's going to be a very comprehensive discussion, especially with relevance to GS1, social issues, GS2, health and vulnerable sections, and GS3, organized crime. Now, whenever we talk about the drug abuse in the country, what we have to understand is the picture with respect to India. Now, India has a diverse population. We have people from different ethnicities, different tribal groups, different castes. Second, we also have to look at the demography aspect. That is, we have a very young population. More than 66% of the total population is under the age of 35 years of age, a very young population. Then the other aspect is with respect to the economic disparities. That is, we have different classes. There is economic inequality. Now, along with these factors, what you have to understand is, as I told in the beginning, that there are certain other factors also. For example, the changing cultural norms. We are adopting more of Western values, what we call, and we are becoming more modern, what we call ourselves as. Then the next aspect is that there is, again, with the rising aspirations, with the rising materialism, there is one more aspect of economic stress. Then there is a breakage of the relationships among people. There is dwindling relationships. So all these factors, it is leading to this particular issue of drug abuse in the country. That is what you have to understand. So there are multiple reasons which are responsible for the overall drug abuse in the country. Now, when we look at the picture of India, what you have to understand is that the overall magnitude with respect to the drug abuse, it's quite high. Now, we have this particular report of AIMS of the year 2019, which says that with respect to alcohol, we have almost 16 crore people who are basically consuming alcohol. And we have 8.6 crore people who are in the dependence mode, right? Then let's talk about cannabis, almost 2.2 crore people. Then let's talk about opioid, almost 1.25 crore people when we talk about the heroin, which is nothing but the refined opium, right? So the situation is obviously very critical. Now, again, what you have to understand is that this data, it's with respect to the year 2019, right? So the picture has obviously changed a lot. Now, the next thing which you have to understand is that there is a very high usage of opioids in the country, right? Just look at this particular picture, infographic provided by the India Today group. It talks about the opioid usage, right? Look at this. The world average with respect to the usage of opioids between the range of 15 to 64 years, it's just 0.7%. Whereas for India, it stands to be almost 2.06%. So it's quite high when compared to the world average. Also, look for the cannabis. The world average is 3.9%. The Indian scenario is 1.2%. Look at the amphetamine type stimulants. It's 0.7% for the world and 0.18% for the India. So obviously, when we talk about the opioids, the condition is critical with respect to India. Now, why this problem is so grave? It is because it is primarily responsible for 3 Ds. What is this 3 Ds? The very first is death, that is mortality. So drugs are one of the major causes of mortality. The second is the disability, even to the extent of permanent disability. And the third is disease, different diseases. For example, the blood transmitted diseases, right? So that is one of the very grave concerns. Now, if you would look at the state-wise prevalence of drug abuse in the country, what you would observe is that we have the states like Himachal, or we have the states like Uttar Pradesh, or we have these eastern or northeastern states like Odisha or Chhattisgarh or Arunachal Pradesh or Assam, where the drug prevalence is quite high. One thing which you have to understand is that these are also the regions where the developmental indicators are quite low. So you can correlate that aspect of backwardness with respect to the drug abuse or drug usage in the country, right? Also, we have this another data which talks about the state-wise prevalence of current use of opioids. Again, the same picture. We have the northern Indian states, we have these eastern states, and we have these northeastern states. The same picture is there. Now, what are the reasons or the factors for the drug abuse in the country? The very first is as a stress buster. Many independent studies, what they have concluded is in some of the top tiered colleges in the country, in some of the best performing colleges in the country, we have some students who have become drug addicts. And it is primarily because of the pressure they are having with respect to the studies or the assignments. Also, the increasing workload in the corporate scenario, that is making people to look at these drugs as a stress coping mechanism, right? So this is one of the very important reasons. Next, homesickness. There are many students who come to far off places for the very first time in their life. And as a mechanism to cope up with that homesickness, they ultimately depend upon these drugs. Then we have unemployment. Because of the rising unemployment, people do not have the adequate jobs. And then they see these alcohol or other drugs as a coping mechanism, right? Next aspect is peer pressure, one of the very, very important reasons. Whenever we have the young students who enter colleges, what they look at initially to these drugs or alcohol as an aspect of fun, right? And you have many people, in fact, the Bollywood or the Hollywood, they have glamorized the usage of drugs, the usage of alcohol. So that is one of the initiation points which leads to the usage of these drugs. Next, they watch the seniors or the elders. And because of that peer pressure, they get habitual of having these drugs, right? Next, we have sufferings and poverty or deprivation. There can be a person who has suffered a lot, maybe because of a loss of a near or dear ones. So as to have that coping mechanism, the person relies on a particular drug or alcohol. That is one of the reasons. Then as poverty or deprivation. You must have seen that, we see people lying on the roads and we have this notion, look, they're not working or why they're lying on the roads. But what we forget to realize is that sometimes what happens because of the sheer poverty, because of the lack of resources, they do not have adequate money to even buy the food. So as a mechanism to cope up with hunger, they rely on drugs. That is what you have to understand. Then there is this aspect of systemic flaws. You must have heard about these rave parties being conducted. And one of the most important instruments through which these rave parties are organized is the social media. And it is being organized because of the illicit nexus, the illegal nexus between the law enforcement agencies, for example, the police. Then we have these cartels, these syndicates of the drugs. Then we have these event organizers. So there is an illegal nexus between different entities. Next aspect is the Lay's food items. Even, you must have seen, we have these different items, for example, Maggi or noodles or pan masala. They're now being laced with these drugs. And even they're being provided to the school children. So this is a very grave issue. Next aspect is that of the smuggling of drugs. If you just look at these two regions adjoining the country, we have the Golden Triangle comprising of the countries of Myanmar, Laos and Thailand. Then we have on the other side, we have these Golden Crescent, which comprise of the countries like Iran, Afghanistan and Pakistan. Now these two regions adjoining India, they are the global hub of the production of opium and then refined opium, what we call as heroin. Now just imagine the condition. If you have these two adjoining regions, definitely the risk with respect to drug trafficking in India, it increases to a great level, right? And it also compromises the very interests of India, the security interest as well as the health standard of the people. Now, next aspect is we have this World Drug Report, right, of 2024, which said that there has been almost 30 crore people, 292 million, almost 30 crore people are drug addicts around the world. And there has been a 20% increase in the last decade with respect to the drug usage globally. Now, what are the consequences of drug abuse? The very first is the health consequence. Health consequence with respect to the person who is consuming a particular drug. You must have seen if a person is consuming a lot of alcohol, then that can compromise the liver of that particular person. The person can suffer from liver cirrhosis, what we call as liver cancer. Then we have different infectious disease. Because these drug users, they share the syringes, and it is one of the sources of blood transmitted diseases. For example, the HIV, for example, the hepatitis A or hepatitis B, right? Next, we have the cases of overdose. So we have seen in different rave parties what happens just because people want to enjoy. They overconsume a particular drug, be it heroin or be it some other drugs. And in many situations, that particular person succumbs because of that overdose, right? Then there are cases of depression and anxiety. Even when a particular person wants to stop consuming the drugs, what would happen is in that course of rehabilitation, the person would suffer from acute depression and anxiety. So these are, which basically takes a heavy toll on the mental state of that particular person. So these are some of the very serious health consequences. Also, just look at this particular infographic. Very important. Now this data is with respect to the drug de-addiction center in Srinagar. Look at this. Now what it says is that one addict walks into Srinagar OPD every 12 minutes. This particular problem of drug abuse, it is more serious than the threat of militancy, right? So this is a very, very serious issue. Next aspect is that of social and family impacts. See, if a person is consuming a lot of these drugs, be it alcohol or be it some other drugs, that would definitely impact the overall family. That would lead to the breakage of the relations. It would cause emotional trauma within the family, right? So this is a very serious issue. Also, that person who is consuming the drug, he would suffer from neglect, abuse or stigma. Because again, understand, if a person is seriously over dependent upon certain drugs, we cannot see that person as a criminal, but the society looks at that particular person from that point of view. That person is a victim, so he becomes a victim. He is subjected to neglect, abuse and stigma. Also, it disrupts the education. Let's imagine that if you have a youth who has a great potential, and if that particular youth is involved in different drugs, that would obviously compromise his overall educational outcomes and his overall economic potential, right? Next, we have economic consequences. See, if a person is consuming drugs of any sorts, that obviously has a cost to it, right? So the cost is borne by the family. You must have seen in different scenarios that, people who consume alcohol or some other drugs, they come home and they beat their wives or their children. So ultimately what happens is they want money, they want to extract the money, and then they are overly dependent upon those drugs. So it is obviously, there's a cost with respect to the drug usage, and then there are costs with respect to the health aspect also, right? If the person would suffer, then there would be additional costs with respect to the health. So there are a lot of economic consequences also. Then we have the productivity issues also. If a person is regularly consuming the drugs, that would obviously compromise the overall productivity of that individual, his overall potential. Then we have the aspects of crimes. See, most of the crimes which are committed, they are committed by those persons who are in inebriated state or those who are in that intoxicated states. Why? Because when a person consumes a particular drug or let's say alcohol or anything, then it impairs the judgment of that person. There is no moral inhibition which is there. Person is not stopped by any values, right? So there is this feeling of anger or revenge, and ultimately we have many of the crimes which are committed, including that of the murders. So this is one of the very serious consequences of drug abuse. Now, what are the challenges? The very first is lack of awareness and education. Just look at this particular map. I told you we have these northern Indian states or the eastern states or the northeastern states. These are the states which are performing quite low when we talk about the developmental indicators. Now, the people over here, they are not really aware with respect to the consequences which these drugs can have, the serious implications which these drugs can have. So that there is the lack of information, education and communication with respect to the consequences which these drugs can have, right? Risk of drug abuse and consequences. Insufficient IEC is there. Next, we have stigma and discrimination. See, these people, as I told you, they're subjected to neglect. Society looks them as from that angle of criminal mindset, that they are criminals, not victims, right? So ultimately what happens that these people, once they feel that, we are being looked at in a particular manner, then it discourages the seeking help attitude or support. They really don't want the kind of help from the society. Also, there is acute discrimination which is there. That is the overall health setup, the society. It is treating these people in a very discriminatory manner. So that is one of the very important concerns. So this hinders the access with respect to the health services, the accessibility with respect to the health services, the rehabilitation centers, drug de-addiction centers, then limited access to treatment and rehabilitation. In India, the picture is that we have very few drug de-addiction centers. We have very few rehabilitation centers. So in proportion to the number of people who are basically addicted, we have very small numbers. And even when we have these drug de-addiction centers, we have acute shortage of these healthcare professionals. We do not have the adequate trained professionals. Then there is inadequate research and data. See, what you have to understand, that if the government wants to come up with any policy, a robust policy, there has to be at the base a robust data. But most of the data which we are having with respect to the drug users in the country, that is based on surveys. The second reason is that the family of those persons, they are not really inclined to share the data with the authorities. Or what we can say is they're reluctant to share the data, because what they think is that if they will tell that any of their family members is suffering from a drug problem, then it would lead to, the society would come, or the society would be aware with respect to that. And they really don't want that. So that is one of the very important aspects. And this hampers the evidence-based policy making. Challenges are also with respect to the stigmatized nature of that particular disease. Then we have the easy availability of drugs. As I already told you, that we have these two adjoining areas, the Golden Triangle and the Golden Crescent. So ultimately what happens is that there is very easy availability of drugs because of illicit drug trafficking. And many youths can afford it. And ultimately their overall health and their overall social sphere gets compromised, right? Also, the Narcotics Control Bureau has said that there is the existence of darknet and the usage of cryptocurrency with respect to these drugs. And it is related with other organized crimes also, the human trafficking, the arms trafficking, right? New substances, very, very important. See, whenever we look at the regulatory structure, the overall regulatory framework, we just focus upon few of these drugs, or alcohol, or heroin, or cocaine. We do not look at the new chemicals which are emerging. And these chemicals are even more active substances. Right? And in many of these rave parties or other places, these chemicals are now being used and they are outside the regulatory framework. So this is a very grave, serious issue. Psychoactive substances, new emerging substances, many fall outside the scope of existing drug control regulations. Just look at this. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. So this particular the World Drugs Report is published by this particular organization. It says, according to the report, the number of people using the drugs reached almost 30 crores in 2022, a 20% increase over the past decade. Very important, can be asked in the prelims, this particular report. Now, what have been the government initiatives to tackle the drug abuse in the country? So, let's talk about the legal framework which we have, the kind of statutory framework we have with respect to the drug addiction aspect. So as to control or prohibit or end the drug addiction. The very first is that we have three central acts. The first is Drugs and Cosmetics Act of 1940. The second is the Narcotics, Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act of 1985. Then we have the Prevention of Illicit Traffic in Narcotics, Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act of 1988. These are the three most important laws with respect to curbing the drug menace in the country. Next, what you have to understand is, for the most premier agencies with respect to ending the drug menace in the country is a Narcotics Control Bureau, which comes under the overall jurisdiction of Ministry of Home Affairs. Very important. Now, this particular agency, this was basically formulated or instituted under the Narcotics, Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act of 1985. This is what you have to understand. Next aspect is the National Narcotics Coordination Portal. See, I already told you that we have different states. Just before a few months, we also studied that in the state of Himachal is now taking a lot of action so as to curb the drug menace in the country. Also, in this article, what we are seeing is that there is the state of Haryana, which is implementing a lot of measures, the sports-driven approach. So, see, there are multiple stakeholders. The central government is also a stakeholder, the state governments, and we have a lot of agencies like the Narcotics Control Bureau. Then we have in the maritime drug trafficking, we have the Indian Coast Guard, we have the Indian Navy. Now, so as to make sure that there is proper effective coordination among all these entities, we have these National Narcotics Coordination Portal, multiplicity of stakeholders. So we have the Ministry of Home Affairs, which has come up with this particular portal. Now there is a 4-tiered coordination mechanism. The very first, at the apex, lies the Apex NCORD, which is chaired by the Union Home Secretary. Then we have the Executive NCORD, which basically is the executive arm of the NCOD, right, at the union level. Now, this is chaired by the Special Secretary, Internal Security in the Ministry of Home Affairs. Then we have the State NCOD, which is chaired by that particular Chief Secretary of that state. Then we have a District NCOD chaired by the District Magistrate. So we have a proper effective coordination mechanism with respect to the curbing of the drug usage in the country. Then we have the IRCAs, that is Integrated Rehabilitation Centers for Addicts. These are the comprehensive care providers with respect to those people who are in their rehab mode, right? Who want to basically follow or are going under a drug de-addiction plan, right? So we have the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment, who is basically implementing these IRCAs. Financial assistance is being given to the non-governmental organizations and different voluntary organizations so as to maintain and provide the adequate help to these IRCAs, Integrated Rehabilitation Centers for Addicts. Then we have National Action Plan for Drug Demand Reduction. See, again, the very focus of this particular plan is to reduce the demand, right? So it's a demand side initiative. Now, again, this is being implemented by Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment, and the overall time period was from 2018 till 2025, and it's a multi-pronged strategy providing the funds, the finances, the technical help. Next, we have the Nasha Mukt Bharat Abhiyan announced by the Prime Minister on 15th of August 2020. The focus was on 272 districts across different states and union territories. That is to focus upon those most vulnerable areas so as to reduce the usage of drugs with the involvement of almost 500 voluntary organizations. Then we have different international treaties. What is the usage? What is the importance of these international treaties? I'll tell you. The very first is that India is a signatory to various international treaties and conventions. For example, we are a signatory to United Nations Convention on Narcotics Drugs of 1961, the United Nations Convention on Psychotropic Substances 1971, the United Nations Convention for the illicit prohibition or prevention of illicit traffic of narcotics, drugs and psychotropic substances Act of 1988, and the United Nations Convention against the transnational organized crime of 2000. Now, when a particular country signs these conventions, it becomes a sort of an obligation on that particular country to come up with a particular law, right? So India has signed these conventions and it has come with different laws in order to implement the very objective of these conventions. So these are some of the very important ways or the measures which have been taken by the government. Now, what should be the way forward? The very first is scientific or evidence-based policy making. I already told you that most of the policies which the government is coming up with, be it the states or the union, it is based upon different surveys. We do not have the adequate data. So for that, we need to have a proper evidence-based policy making. And for that, we require a proper source of robust data, right? Robust data and thorough mapping. See, robust data can only be available when we destigmatize this particular issue. When we basically give the confidence to the families of that particular person who is suffering from any drug abuse, right? That the data which the families basically provide, it would be kept in a proper privacy mode, right? So that confidence has to be given to the families. Next aspect is there has to be thorough mapping. There are certain regions, I already told you this, there are northern Indian states, there are eastern states, there are northeastern states, where adequate region-specific policy has to be there, right? For that, we need adequate data. Then strengthening the law enforcement agencies. Recently, we came up with a particular exercise which was Sagar Manthan. Now, this particular exercise involved different entities. For example, the Indian Navy, the Indian Coast Guard, the Gujarat Anti-Terror Squad, right? Also, obviously, including the Narcotics Control Bureau. Now, this was to make sure that we curb the maritime drug trafficking. So, we need to come up with these exercises. We need to come up with different campaigns, right? We need to strengthen the law enforcement agencies. We need to make sure that there is adequate coordination among different entities. And we need to give them the adequate training, technology, and resources. Then there are socio-economic factors. See, as I've already told you, that most of these people who are consuming these drugs, they belong to the low socio-economic strata. We need to provide them the adequate employment opportunities. There have to be different poverty alleviation programs. You are already aware that we have the Manrega, Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. So definitely that scope can be extended, right? Or what we can do is we can provide some credit so that it can basically make these people to come up with their own livelihood options, self-employment opportunities. For example, we have this particular scheme of PM Swanidhi, Prime Minister Street Vendors Atmanirbhar Nidhi, right? So as to provide the collateral-free loans to the people. Then we can also increase the ambit of the Right to Education Act. We already know Right to Education is from 6 to 14 years of age. Why not extend till 18 years of age, right? So we need to come up with a mix of different policies which cater to the poverty elevation aspect, the employment aspect, and the education aspect. Next, the reducing the demand of the drugs. Here, the community needs to play a very proactive role. It first needs to make sure that it destigmatizes the people. That person should not be looked at, the person who is consuming a drug should not be looked at as a person who is a criminal. He should be treated like a victim, and adequate provisions should be made with respect to the health of that particular individual. So the community needs to play a very important role, and for that we need to have different proactive information, education, and communication campaigns. See, again, what we are saying is drug addiction or the drug usage is really a very serious public health issue, and we have to basically come up with different innovative measures. The government is already focusing upon the coordination aspect. It is coming up with various initiatives in order to provide the resources to different voluntary organizations. Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment is already doing that, and we have different state governments who are also coming up with their own policies. For example, the state of Haryana is having a sports driven approach. So what we are trying to say is there has to be a multi-pronged approach, because if we really want to utilize the demographic dividend, if we want to have a strong future, a bright future, we need to make sure that we stem down this problem of drug menace in the country. Let's have a means practice question. The increasing drug menace in India poses a serious threat to the public health, socio-economic stability, and national security. Analyze the factors contributing to the risk in the drug abuse and trafficking in India. Also suggests a multi-pronged strategy to tackle the issue effectively. 15 marks, 250 words. Do write a particular answer on this question. And yes, if you're liking the initiative, do not forget to press the like button and do mention in the comment section. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to Hooch tragedies. Now, this is a very serious public health issue, and it has become a recurring phenomenon. At many places across the country, what we have seen is different people have succumbed because of the consumption of hooch, what we call as the illicit liquor. Now, there are two aspects to it. The very first aspect, which has been emphasized in the article, is that there is the illicit nexus, the illegal nexus, or the bad nexus between the law enforcement agencies, for example, the police, and the producers of these hooch, which is basically leading to the deaths of many people. The second aspect is that what is the biological mechanism which is involved when we talk about the consumption of the hooch, and what is actually hooch, right? How the process of alcohol takes place in the body, right? So we look at different aspects from the perspective of science and technology. Now we need to understand that the most important component, the reason behind the deaths of the people, is the methanol. Now, methanol is classified as a poison in many states. So we will see what the mechanism is all about. Now, let's talk about alcohol in general. Now, we all know that when we talk about the liquor, it is differentiated on the basis of the alcohol content. For example, we have beer. Now, beer has almost 5% of alcohol content. Then we have wines. It has almost to the tune of 12%. Then we have whiskey. It has alcohol to the content of almost 40%. So, on the basis of the alcohol present, we basically differentiate different liquors. That is what you have to understand. Now, every alcohol, all the alcohol contain one of the most important material, and that is ethanol. And this is what the psychoactive drug is. That is a substance which basically leads to that kick, right? That is what you have to understand. Now, the formula is CH3CH2OH. Now, we have the first carbon, which is attached to 3 hydrogens. Then we have the second carbon attached to 2 hydrogens and the hydroxyl group. That is what you have to understand. Now, what happens is, whenever there is the consumption of ethanol, it is metabolized in the liver and the stomach. And the process which takes place is like that. So, we have the ethanol and we have a particular enzyme, which is alcohol dehydrogenase. Now, this particular enzyme converts the alcohol, primarily the ethanol, into the acetaldehyde. And then we have a second type of enzyme, which is acetaldehyde dehydrogenase, which basically converts the acetaldehyde into acetic acid. And then it breaks into CO2 and H2O. That is what the general process is all about. So, we have the alcohol being converted into the acetaldehyde with the help of ADH, alcohol dehydrogenase, and then acetaldehyde converts into acetic acid with the help of acetaldehyde dehydrogenase. That is what you have to understand. Now, what happens is, you must have seen that there are different adverse effects of the consumption of alcohol. The very first is hangover. And in many serious situations, when there is chronic consumption of alcohol, it also leads to liver cirrhosis, right? Liver cancer, what we call as. And it is primarily because of this acetaldehyde. So this acetaldehyde is a substance which is carcinogenic in nature. That is what you have to understand. Now, what is hooch? What we call as spurious liquor. See, If in layman terms we say, try to explain it, it is nothing but a poor quality alcohol. Whenever we have these branded alcohol, there is a particular process which is followed. There are quality checks which are there, right? So we know that how much content of ethanol is present and what is that content of methanol which is present in that branded alcohol. But when we talk about these hooch, they are made in crude settings. There are no quality checks. They are illegally manufactured. So ultimately what happens is that the amount of methanol present in these drinks, it is basically exceeding a particular limit, which is causing irreversible damage to the human health, right? Homemade liquor, methanol is added to strengthen the intoxicating effect. See, what happens is, in these hoots, what happens, in order to increase that kick, in order to increase that intoxicating effect, they just add the methanol to it. And that has very grave consequences. According to the Food Safety Standards Authority of India, so what it says that, see, again, you need to understand, every food contains a very infinite small amount of methanol. And that amount is basically, the standards are given by the FSSAI. But what we need to understand is the FSSAI cannot regulate these hoots because they are manufactured in illegal settings. It is illegally manufactured alcohol. That is what you have to understand. Now, what is methanol? We have been talking about methanol, but what it is. So we have this particular carbon which is attached to 3 hydrogens and then the hydroxyl group, what we call as CH3OH. Now, according to the Manufacture, Storage, Import of Hazardous Chemical Rules of 1989, methanol is classified into Schedule 1 of this particular rules, indicating that it is toxic in nature, right? So it is a chemical which is toxic in nature. Now, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't have any kind of applications. It has a lot of applications. For example, it is used as a precursor. In order to manufacture the acetic acid, we need methanol, right? In order to basically manufacture the formaldehyde and aromatic hydrocarbons, you must have seen that varnishes which are used in different paints, we need these methanol, right? Also, it is also used as a solvent and as an antifreeze. So it has a lot of applications also. But when we add it to the alcohol, definitely it proves to be very serious, and it in many cases leads to the death of the people. Now, how does the methanol in hooch kill? According to a research done by University of London, what it says that in every Hooch tragedy in the history of India and of the world since 1945, the poison has been methanol. Why? See, what happens? Our human body contains very small amount of methanol. But once you have these hoots which contain a sufficient or a good amount of methanol, and once it goes into the body, the mechanism is totally different. Now, it is not as same as the ethanol. Ethanol had a different mechanism, I already told you. Methanol now has a different mechanism. What happens? That once you have the ingestion of methanol, we have these ADH, that is alcohol dehydrogenase. It basically converts the methanol into the formaldehyde. Now, what you have to understand that this metabolism takes place in the liver and the stomach. So we have the methanol going inside the body with the help of the enzymes, that is alcohol dehydrogenase, and it is now being converted into formaldehyde. Now, formaldehyde, it then converts into formic acid with the help of the acetaldehyde dehydrogenase, right? So that is what you have to understand. Now, again, once we have the formation of formic acid, this is something which increases the acidity in the blood. So formic acid is the substance which ultimately increases the toxicity in the body. Now, once we have the accumulation of the formic acid, it leads to a condition known as the metabolic acidosis, what we call as acidemia, right? So it basically lowers down the blood pH levels. And ultimately, see, the normal value of the blood pH is 7.35, but it suddenly lowers down the value of the pH in the blood, right? So overall acidity in the body increases. Formic acid also interferes with a particular enzyme known as cytochrome oxidase. Now, this particular enzyme, it is very much helpful in order to absorb the oxygen. So we have different cells. Now, they have to absorb the oxygen. But once we have the formic acid in the body, it inhibits the cytochrome oxidase. And therefore, the cells are not able to absorb the oxygen. It also leads to the buildup of lactic acid in the body. So at one place, you are having the formic acid, which is already increasing the acidity. Also, in addition, we are having the lactic acid. So cumulatively, they are exceedingly increasing the acidity of the body. Now, according to a journal, which is the Archives of Toxicology, what it says that once we have the ingestion of methanol, it basically damages the optic nerves and the retina, and it leads to the condition of optic neuropathy, which basically gives an irreversible damage to the vision, right? So the vision is completely lost and it's irreversible. Then it also leads to cerebral edema, that is swelling of the brain because of the fluids, right? It can also, in some serious situations, lead to hemorrhage and ultimately death also. So these are some of the consequences of the methanol toxicity. For example, acute visual changes, increased respiratory rate, shortness of breath, chest pain, headache, dizziness. Then we have vomiting, nausea, and other things. Now, how can methanol poisoning be treated? Now, there are two immediate ways to treat the methanol poisoning. The very first is administering the pharmaceutical grade ethanol. Now, this might seem counterintuitive. That is, you already have a person who is suffering from methanol poisoning, and what you are asking to do is, you are asking to administer the ethanol. Why? See, I told you we have this particular enzyme which is alcohol dehydrogenase, right? Now, methanol is being converted into formaldehyde with the help of this ADH. If you administer a person with ethanol, now ethanol can basically metabolize the ADH 10 times faster than methanol. So it would subdue the levels of methanol in the body. That is what you have to understand. So therefore, one of the ways is to administer the person the pharmaceutical grade ethanol. Then administer an antidote, which is fomepizole. That is one of the other options. Now, both of these courses are limited. Why? Because see, the very first is, whenever you have a particular person who has suffered from methanol poisoning, there has to be a medical supervision, adequate medical supervision with respect to the administer of the pharmaceutical grade ethanol. That's first thing. Second, the drug, fomepizole, it's quite expensive in nature. So the application of these two things, it's quite limited, right? And most of the people who are consuming the methanol or who are consuming the hooch, they belong to the low socioeconomic strata. So they do not have the adequate resources to basically cope up with these mechanisms. If the individual consumes the ethanol along with the methanol, damage may not be evident until a few days. So what happens? As I already told you in the beginning, we have these manufacturers of the hooch who basically in the ethanol mix the methanol. So the effect is not seen at that point itself. Effect can be seen after 2-3 days. And by that time, what happens? Already a lot of time has elapsed, and that gives an irreversible damage to the body, and in many a times the person die. So again, what we are trying to focus upon is the biological aspect, the metabolism which is involved. There is one aspect with respect to the legal framework, which obviously need to be made more robust, but this aspect there can be a question with respect to the scientific or the biological base or the mechanism which is involved when we talk about the methanol poisoning. Now let's have a mains practice question. Methanol poisoning continues to claim hundreds of lives every year in India through spurious liquor, hooch, what we call as. Examine the scientific basis of the methanol toxicity and its physiological impact on the human body. 10 marks, 150 words. Please do write a particular answer to this question. Let's go to the next section. Coming to the simplified section, we have the first topic which talks about the Supreme Court striking down the retrospective environmental clearances given to different projects. Now, let's look at the gist of the article. See, we have a very robust framework, what we call as the Environment Impact Assessment of 2006. What is this Environment Impact Assessment? Let's say the government is coming up with a particular developmental project, right? Planning that particular developmental project. Now, once that particular project starts, it can have different irreversible damages to the overall environment in the form of, for example, deforestation, or in the form of the water quality, or in the form of the emission of different pollutants. Now, in order to see whether we should carry out the project or not, or if the project is being carried out, how the different effects, the ill effects can be mitigated, we have this particular environment impact assessment. And once the process, the particular project goes through the process of EIA, then it is given an environmental clearance. Now, what happened in the year 2017 was that the government came up with a particular circular. It said that for those projects for which the work has already started, we would deem that the environmental clearances have already been given to them. We would deem that. We would think that the environmental clearances are given to them. Now, again in the year 2021, the government came up with another circular, which ultimately gave a boost to the earlier circular. Right. So the need of the proper environment impact assessment was not felt by the government. Now, recently in a 2-judge bench of the Supreme Court, what they have ordered is, they have said that this particular order of 2017 and 21, it is null and void. That is, projects would have to mandatorily go with environment impact assessment. But they have also said that for those projects for which the clearances have already been deemed to be given, we would not basically interfere with those projects. But from now onwards, we would make sure that proper environment impact is carried out, the assessment is carried out. Next aspect which the Supreme Court has also clarified is that we have the Article 21, right to life and personal liberty. What the Supreme Court has said is that right to live in a pollution-free environment is an integral part of Article 21 itself. So very beautiful judgment which has been delivered by the Supreme Court. Environment conservation is key to development. The Supreme Court finally struck down and held as illegal a 2017 Ministry of Environment notification that allowed the grant of environmental clearances to project ex post facto, that is after the commencement of the work, right? It also struck down the 2021 office memorandum issued by the ministry in pursuance of the 2017 notification. Also, as I told you, we have this particular two-judge bench. Now, this also said, it also restrained the center for passing any order, any circular, providing for the grant of ex post facto environmental clearances or for regularizing the acts done in contravention of the 2006 Environment Impact Assessment. So ultimately what the court is saying is that you have to follow the due process of law. And one of the aspects, one of the very important steps is to carry out the Environment Impact Assessment, which you have failed to carry it out. So you cannot give, again, a clearance on this basis, ex post facto, that the project has already been started, please deem that the environmental clearances has been given. So this cannot be held as true. What we have to do is, for every project, there has to be a particular EIA which has to be carried out. The Supreme Court, however, clarified that environmental clearances, important point, already granted till date under the 2017 notification and 21 office memorandum shall remain unaffected. For those projects for which the government has already given the clearances, we would not basically alter with them. The 2017 notification had offered a one-time amnesty window of different sorts, allowed the approvals for projects where the work had commenced without obtaining the prior environmental clearances under the 2006 Environment Impact Assessment notification. Now, this particular 2017 circular, it was only for a period of 6 months. But the government, through various ways and means, it extended this particular aspect. And ultimately, the need for having the environment impact assessment was not felt. And that ultimately had a disastrous impact on the environment, right? The 2017 amnesty was applicable for 6 months. In 2021, citing the compliance of National Green Tribunal order, the ministry issued an office memorandum spelling out a standard operating procedure for dealing with violation cases. According to the Supreme Court, the 2017 notification, very important point, right? Very cogent point. Provision for the grant of ex post facto environment clearance was made only in relation to the projects or activities which were in violation as of 14 March 2017. For those projects, you came up with a circular which said that for those projects as of 14 March 2017, right, for which the work has already been started, we will only look for that aspect. So why are you looking for different projects which were carried out after that? You should ideally be not looking at those projects, right? So those projects must be following the environmental clearances, that is environment impact assessment. Therefore, grant of ex post facto clearance was not permitted under the 2017 notification for projects which commenced or continued after the 14th March of 2017. The EIA notification is of 14th September 2006 and the Supreme Court has said that it's nearly 15 years old. All projects proponents were fully aware of the stringent requirements of the EIA notification. So ideally, this should have been carried out. So why did you derelict or neglect this aspect? Very important point. The 2021 Office Memorandum seeks to protect the violators who have acted with full knowledge of consequence of violating the EIA notification. In environment matters, the court said, the courts must take a very strict view of the violations of the law relating to the environment. Under Article 21, now again, what we have seen is in the UPSC, a lot of questions, and I have given a particular question also, which came in the year 2022, where the UPSC is trying to look at the judgments delivered by the Supreme Court in the environmental domain, right? So this becomes very important. Under Article 21 of the Constitution of India, the right to live in a pollution-free environment is guaranteed. The 86 Act, the Environment Protection Act, has been enacted to give effect to this fundamental right. In 77, the fundamental duties of the citizens were also incorporated in the Constitution, which basically asks every citizen of India to protect and improve the environment as provided in subclause G of Article 51, capital A. Therefore, even the center has a duty to protect and improve the natural environment, right? Conservation of environment and its improvement is an essential part of the concept of development. Therefore, going out of the way by issuing such office memorandums to protect those who have caused the harm to the environment has to be deprecated by the courts, which are under a constitutional and statutory mandate to uphold the fundamental rights under Article 21 and to protect the environment. Today, we have been experiencing the drastic consequences of large-scale destructions of the environment on human lives. The AQI level is either dangerous or very dangerous. Therefore, the measures such as 2021 Office Memorandum is violative of the fundamental rights of the people guaranteed under Article 21 of the Indian Constitution, right to life and personal liberty. To live in a pollution-free environment, it also infringes upon the right to health guaranteed under Article 21 of the Constitution. Now, let's talk about the Environment Impact Assessment. What is this all about? So, it's a study conducted in the early stages of the development project planning to basically predict and address the potential environment impacts. So, as to see what possible impacts it can have and how we can mitigate those impacts, right? So, what are the objectives of EIA? The very first is to promote the environment-friendly long-term growth. Second is to render detail on the environmental impact, what possible environment impact the project can have, identification of legitimate options and mitigation measures, to predict and evaluate the ecological, economic, social effects of growth-related activities. So it's a wide domain, also including the social aspect. So what is the statutory basis? So we have the Environment Protection Act of 1986. So it made the EIA mandatory. Nodal ministry, again, Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change. Project consideration, EIA notification of 2006, categorized on the development projects in different categories. For example, category A projects needed prior environment clearances from the Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change. Category B projects needed prior environment clearances from the state government. So we have category A by the union at the union level, category B at the level of the state. Category B1 mandatorily requires EIA, category B2 do not require the EIA. Environment Impact Assessment. So what are the different steps which are to be carried out? So for example, we have the screening, which talks about the need of EIA, whether there has to be a need or not. Scoping, that is, identifies the important issues of EIA. Public consultation addresses the concerns of affected people, the stakeholders, right? Project appraisal, scrutiny of the final EIA report. Decision making, granting the environment clearances, monitoring post the environment clearances, compliance of general and specific conditions. And these are the entities, you can just have a look, which are involved in these different stages with respect to the EIA, right? So we have other government initiatives. For example, we have the Parivesh portal, right? Then we have the Environment Information System, ENVIS, what we call, and then we have the Draft Environment Impact Assessment Notification of 2020. Now, the question which I was about to emphasize is this. So this is a question from 2022. Look at the question. The most significant achievement of modern law in India is the constitutionalization of environmental problems by the Supreme Court. And see how well you can use the current article, the information provided in the current article in this particular answer, right? Discuss the statement with the help of relevant case laws. Do try to write an answer on this particular question. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is about the nutrition outcomes with special reference to women in the country. Now, let's look at the gist of the article. What the author is trying to say is that in the last 5 to 6 years, the government has come up with different schemes. For example, the Poshan Abhiyan or the PM Poshan, which tries to raise the nutrition levels of children of class 1 to 8, or the Poshan 2.0, which focuses upon the pregnant and lactating mothers. Now, what the author is saying is that we are only focusing upon providing the adequate nutrition. But are we giving due importance to the economic sphere or the social sphere? That is, that there is very low participation of women in the economic sphere. That's the first thing. And she has provided the due data with respect to that. Second, what she's saying is that when we talk about the decision-making power, women have very less decision-making power in the overall household. And they are the ones who consume the least amount of food and they consume at the last. So what she's trying to say is that in addition to these schemes, we should also focus upon providing them the adequate livelihoods so that they become independent, right? So we'll go through the article and then we'll basically also do the validation part. Hunger and malnutrition remain the pressing concerns, yet in India's long battle against malnutrition, women and girls remain the most overlooked sections. Despite steady economic progress and numerous welfare schemes, nutritional inequality continues to be deeply gendered. So this is also one aspect. Nutritional inequality, when we talk about the genders, right? Launched in 2018 with the vision of malnutrition-free India, by 2022, Prime Minister's overarching scheme for holistic nourishment, what we call as Poshan Abhiyan, has the aim of improving the nutrition for pregnant women, lactating mothers, adolescent girls, and young children. So these are the beneficiaries which the government is targeting. The National Family Health Survey 5 reveals that important data, and this is how you use this data in the mains answers, right? 57% of the women in the age group of 15 to 49 years are anemic in comparison to 26% of the men. Nearly 1 in 5 women are underweight. In other words, women are far more likely to be malnourished than men in India. So there is inequality which is there. These figures point to structural failures. Even after merging the schemes into Poshan 2.0 and investing heavily, the needle has not moved enough. Indeed, Poshan Abhiyan is India's largest nutrition program with a hefty budget. In 2022-23, the Ministry of Women and Child Development was allocated nearly 24,000 crores for Saksham Anganwadi and Poshan 2.0. But by December 22, only 69% of these funds had been utilized. So this is also one of the aspects in which I have told many a times that first of all, we do not have the adequate funding. And even when we have the adequate funding, we are not utilizing it properly. So these are the two aspects. Despite such spending, the prevalence of anemia among the women actually rose from 53% to 57% between the last two NFHs, and about 18.7% of women remain underweight. This contrast suggests that just pumping in resources into a women-centric nutrition scheme is not enough, right? So you can't just pump in the resources. You'll have to look for reasons that even after investing so much, after spending so much money, the anemic levels are increasing, right? The number of women who are underweight, it's increasing. So there is a loophole, right? In many Indian households, especially the poorer ones, women's nutritional needs are literally last in line. Important point. Entrenched cultural norms, patriarchy in the society, male dominance, right, mean that when food is scarce, when it's less, women and girls eat least and last. Very cogent point. Thus, malnutrition is not just biomedical or food supply issue, it's social justice issue. If a woman lacks economic independence or decision-making power, she may have little control over her diet and health. So ultimately, we have to focus upon making the women economically independent. Even government data underscores this particular link. The NFHS 5 found that 49% of the women lack decision-making power over how their own earnings are spent. So they are not able to decide how their earnings are to be spent, right? Very serious issue. This financial dependence often translates into compromised nutrition, a result of gender-based deprivation. The issue of empowerment. Studies have shown that empowering women financially is one of the most effective ways to improve the nutrition. So you have to empower them financially, provide them adequate livelihood options. Nobel laureate Esther Duflo, for instance, finds that when women control extra income, and this is the point, these are the points you can cite in your answers, right, or even the essays. When women control extra income, they're more likely to spend it on the nutrition and children's well-being. In a study we conducted among the low-income communities, we observed that women with even a modest independent income or control over the household spending were far less likely to be undernourished. The missing piece in India's nutrition puzzle is the women's economic and social empowerment. In addition to the provision of the nutrition, we should also focus upon empowering women socially and economically, right? The state of women's employment suggests that female labor force participation has risen from 23% in 17 to around 33% in 21, a positive shift on paper. But a vast majority of the working women are insecure in low-paying jobs, lack of social security, right? Periodic labor force surveys of 21-22, only 5% of the working women held a regular salary job. Only 5%. Very small number. While nearly 20% were self-employed. Then the other aspect is, moreover, self-employed women earned on an average 53% less than men. 53% less than men. So there is no gender parity, right? There is no pay parity which is involved. In effect, many women who do work are barely earning enough to survive. Employment has not translated into power to make decisions or invest in their own nutrition and well-being. Thus, it is not enough to get women into the workforce. The quality and security of their jobs matter just as much. Without skills training, equal pay, and access to stable employment, women remain economically vulnerable. So we have to focus upon these aspects. There have to be equal pay. There have to be proper skill training, right? As a result, even well-intentioned nutrition programs such as Poshan will have limited impact if women cannot afford or are not empowered to consume the nutritious food being provided through different schemes of the government. Government reports praise Poshan Abhiyan for creating awareness and a Jan Andolan around nutrition. But awareness alone cannot fill the empty stomach, right? So you need to empower them economically so that they can have their own livelihood options, earn money, and then use that money for raising their own nutrition, right? Now, what are the way forward which the author has given? First, it must set measurable targets, not just for reducing the anemia or stunting, but also for increasing the proportion of women with independent incomes and decision-making power. Second, it must break the silos, making sure that nutrition, health, and livelihood departments work together on joint interventions in high malnutrition districts. That is, there have to be a proper coordination among different departments. Third, it must use Anganwadi centers and health workers to not only distribute food and supplements, but also to connect women with skill training, credit schemes, or job opportunities. Very, very important points. And Anganwadi can double as a one-stop hub for women's welfare, meals, antenatal care, financial literacy, and other things. So again, just see how good and cogent these points are, that we need to use these institutions of Anganwadis as not just the places for providing the nutrition or preschool education or immunization, but also as those places which can provide the skill training, which can provide the adequate sum of money, right, which can then be used for coming up with different livelihood options, which have to basically act not just as the providers of the nutrition, but also as the change with respect to, as the transformation with respect to the social sphere or the economic sphere of that particular woman. Ultimately, a malnutrition-free India will be possible only when women are not seen as passive beneficiaries of nutrition schemes, but as active agents driving the health and the prosperity of their families. So this is what you have to understand. In addition, we have these three schemes. Let's go through them. The Poshan Abhiyan. So it was launched in the year 2018 by the Ministry of Women and Child Development. The very objective of the scheme was to improve the nutritional outcomes of children from 0 to 6 years of age, pregnant women, and lactating mothers. What are the key features? Convergence of various nutrition-related schemes. For example, the Integrated Child Development Scheme, the National Health Mission, then we have Swachh Bharat Mission, and the other schemes. Use of technology, ICT-based real-time monitoring, and we have computer application software. Behavior change communication to us to make it a Jan Andolan, to spread the awareness, focusing upon the reduced stunting, undernutrition, anemia, and low birth weight. What were the targets? By 2022, stunting to be reduced from 38.4% to 25%, undernutrition to reduce by 2% per year, and anemia to reduce by 3% per year. Then we have PM Poshan, Pradhan Mantri Poshan Shakti Nirman, renamed version of midday meal scheme, right? Ministry of Education to provide the nutritious cooked meal to school children and improve the nutrition, attendance, and learning outcomes. Also, to reduce the school dropouts. Target group, children in the classes 1 to 8 in government and government-aided schools. Now, what are the key features? The very first is supplementary nutrition with a focus upon nutritional balance. Second is school nutrition gardens, what we call as Poshan Vatikas, so as to provide the local fruits and vegetables through those gardens. Involvement of farmer produce organizations for local food sourcings. Use of social audit and third-party evaluation. See, the very objective is to increase accountability, to increase transparency. Inclusion of pre-primary students, Bal Vatikas, under the Samagra Shiksha scheme. Why important? It addresses the short-term hunger during the school hours, enhances the enrollment, retention, and attendance. Then we have the third scheme, which is Poshan 2.0, Saksham Anganwadi and Mission Poshan 2.0. Union Budget 21-22. Launched through that. Ministry of Women and Child Development are the implementing agencies to strengthen and integrate the nutrition-related interventions for children, pregnant women, and lactating mothers through the upgraded Anganwadi services. Then what are the different merged schemes? We have the Anganwadi services, preschool education, immunization, health checkups, Poshan Abhiyan, scheme for adolescent girls. Just before a few days we discussed that because of the lack of nutrition, what happens is that these students, they do not perform well. Their cognitive development does not take place, and ultimately they drop out from the school. So as to reduce that dropout, we have this particular scheme, and now it has been merged in portion 2.0. Key features: emphasis on the first 1,000 days of life, focus upon maternal, infant and young children nutrition, what we call as MIYCN, use of technology for monitoring, real-time monitoring, what we call through as the portion tracker, real-time situation of the nutrition aspect, upgradation of Anganwadi infrastructure under the Saksham Anganwadi initiative. So this is what you have to understand and remember from the perspective of prelims. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to the graded response action plan. Now this has been invoked, the GRAP 1 has been invoked by the Commission on Air Quality Monitoring in the NCR region. Now let's look at the gist of the article. See, there can be a situation where you have the pollution which is slowly increasing, right? There can be different levels of pollution. Now, in order to deal with the increasing level of pollutions at different levels, we have different response measures, right? So, our response measures can be graded. For example, it can be categorized into stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 and further. So according to the levels of the pollution, our response also changes. That is what graded response means. So we have the Commission on Air Quality Monitoring, which basically looks at the levels of the pollution, that is the AQI levels, and ultimately decides that which GRAP stages are to be implemented. This is the gist of the article. So we have, after the surge of dust-laden winds from Pakistan and Western Rajasthan pushed air quality index to poor levels and reduced visibility in the capital, the Commission for Air Quality Management, just before a few days, we had a discussion regarding what this particular body is all about. It's a statutory body that you have to understand, and it's a high-powered body. Adjoining areas, and it has jurisdiction in different states, not just Delhi. Delhi, Haryana, Punjab, UP, all these states. On Friday evening, invoked the stage 1 of the graded response action plan with immediate effect in the entire NCR, right? The sudden weather change in Delhi is attributed to a convective system. Sudden heat takes place, you have the low pressure, the winds gush, and ultimately you have the kind of storm surge which is there, right, which increases the pollution levels. An intense localized weather phenomena characterized by the rapid upward movement of warm and moist air. So as I told you that we have the GRAP measures which are implemented on the basis of the air quality index. Now this is primarily a mandate of the Central Pollution Control Board. So the air quality index is a tool for effective communication of air quality status to the people in terms which are easy to understand. So it is for that reason we use a color code, right? It transforms the complex air quality data of various pollutants into a single number, index value, nomenclature and color. There are 6 AQI categories important. There can be a question in the prelims. There are 6 AQI categories, namely good, satisfactory, moderately polluted, poor, very poor and severe. 6 categories. Each of these categories is decided based upon the ambient consideration of the values of air pollutants and their likely health impacts, known as health breakpoints. AQ subindex and health breakpoints are evolved for 8 pollutants. What are these 8 pollutants? PM, particulate matter 10, particulate matter 2.5, nitrogen dioxide, ozone, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, ammonia and lead. Lead is also there, do remember. Right, so this is what you have to understand. As I told you that GRAP are graded response. As the pollution would increase, the response mechanism would also increase. The GRAP serves as a structured approach to address the air pollution issues in Delhi NCR according to the severity of the situation. So as the severity of the pollution would increase, the GRAP measures, the severity would also increase. The GRAP for Delhi NCR is divided into 4 stages of air quality. Stage 1, that is poor category, which is from 201 till 300. Stage 2, very poor, from 301 to 400. Then we have stage 3, severe, from 401 to 450. And then we have stage 4, severe plus, from 451 and plus, right? So this is the AQI color code which you have to understand. What measures can be adopted? For example, in stage 1, agencies to strictly enforce orders by the NGT, National Green Tribunal, Supreme Court on keeping vehicles older than 10 years for diesel and 15 years for petrol off-roads. Stage 2 can be measures to curb the air pollution at hotspots. Diesel generators can be put off. Then stage 3, BS3 and BS4 diesel private cars to be banned in the NCR. Last year the rule was the optional for the state governments. Schools will likely to be closed. Then stage 4. Again, the very objective is to understand that as the pollution would increase, the severity of pollution would increase, the severity of the response measure would also increase. So we have the CAQM, which is basically implementing the GRAP. That is what you have to understand with respect to this article. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to the institution of Lok Adalats. Now the gist of the article is, in as many as 16 districts of Rajasthan, the permanent Lok Adalats are not functioning because of various reasons. In that regard, a division bench of the Rajasthan High Court has taken the suo motu cognizance of this issue and has ordered the government that please provide us the reasons that why these permanent Lok Adalats are not functioning. See, you have to understand, these Lok Adalats are one of the most important and effective ways with respect to the dispute settlement mechanism, especially in a country like India where you have a large section of society which has a low socio-economic background, right? So considering that, Lok Adalats are very, very important. Permanent Lok Adalats which resolve disputes through compromise and mediation are not functioning in as many as 16 districts of Rajasthan for the want of extension of tenure of their presiding officers and members. A recent government order has led to the cessation of tenure after April 8th, leading to the closure of Lok Adalats. A division bench of Rajasthan High Court has taken suo motu cognizance on its own of the matter on the basis of the newspaper reports, holding that it is a serious issue concerning the access to justice. So this is very, very important. Let's talk about Lok Adalats. It's one of the alternate dispute redressal mechanism in India. It's a forum where different cases which are pending in the court or are at pre-litigation stage, they can be settled and compromised. The Lok Adalats have been given statutory status on the basis of Legal Services Authorities Act of 1987. Lok Adalats can be organized at the district, state and national levels. So we have the State District Legal Service Authority and the Supreme Court or High Court or Taluk Legal Service Committee may organize the Lok Adalats at such intervals and places for exercising such jurisdiction in such areas as it thinks fit, right? Again, the very objective is to provide a good access to justice, affordable access to justice. Every Lok Adalat organized for an area shall consist of such number of members serving or retired judicial officers and other persons of the area as may be specified by the agency organizing. Under the Legal Services Authorities Act of 87, a Lok Adalat can make award decisions which are deemed to be a decree of civil court and are final and binding. So always remember, the orders of Lok Adalat are final and binding on the parties concerned. There is no court fee payable when a matter is filed in the Lok Adalat. If a matter is pending in the court of law and is then referred to Lok Adalat and is settled, the court fee originally paid in the court is also refunded back. This is also one of the very important provisions. Dispute resolution in the Lok Adalat takes place by direct interaction of the Adalat members with the parties concerned. Lok Adalats possess jurisdiction over a diverse array of issues including civil disputes, criminal, compoundable offences only. So it only includes compoundable offence, not non-compoundable, and family matters. Nature of cases: any case pending before the court, any dispute which has not been brought before any court, provided that any matter relating to the offence not compoundable under the law shall not be settled in the Lok Adalat. That is what you have to understand. Permanent Lok Adalats, that is what the article is also talking about. The Legal Service Authorities Act of 87 was amended in 2002 to provide for the establishment of permanent Lok Adalats to deal with the cases pertaining to public utility services, for example, transport, the power utilities, telegraphs, postal. These have been set up as permanent bodies and consist of chairman and 2 members. It shall not have jurisdiction in respect of any matter of an offence not compoundable. Jurisdiction of the permanent Lok Adalats is up to 1 crore. Before the dispute is brought before the court, any party of the dispute may make an application to the permanent Lok Adalat for the settlement of the dispute. After an application is made to the permanent Lok Adalat, no party to that application shall invoke the jurisdiction of any court, right? It's irrevocable. Every award made by the permanent Lok Adalat shall be final and binding. Very important aspect on the parties thereto, and shall be made by a majority of the persons constituting the permanent Lok Adalat. Possibly a question with respect to the basis of permanent Lok Adalats. What are the different cases being handled by the Lok Adalat and what is the jurisdiction? Are the rulings binding or not? So a possible question can come in the prelims. Let's go to the last topic of the day. Coming to the last topic of today's discussion, this is with respect to a very important body which is DESA, United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. Now it has come up with a particular report which is the World Economic Situation and Prospects as of mid-25. Now again, what is there in the report is India's economic growth forecast for 25 has been revised downward to 6.3%. The country remains one of the fastest growing large economies, supported by resilient consumption and government spending. The issues why the forecast has been downgraded are: the report said that the global economy is at a precarious juncture marked by heightened trade tensions, primarily because of the tariffs which are being imposed by the US, and elevated policy uncertainty. Now, again, this body becomes really important. So you have to know what this body is all about and what are the different reports which this body comes up with. Rooted in United Nations Charter and guided by the transformative 2030 SDG goals, the UN DESA upholds the development pillar of United Nations. They bring the global community together and work towards common solutions for the world's most pressing problems. So they are at the forefront of the Sustainable Development Goals and form a key component of the UNGA and the Economic and Social Council, what we call as ECOSOC, right? And different commissions and forums. So again, see, there are some reports which are very important and they are published by UNDESA. For example, the World Population Prospects, published by UNDESA. Then we have World Economic Situation and Prospects as of mid-25, which we are discussing in the article. Then we have World Social Report of 25. There can be a possible question in the prelims that who published the World Social Report 2025? So the answer is UNDESA. Financing for Sustainable Development Report 2024. So we have the World Population Prospects and these reports. Please keep a track of them. Possibly a question can come in the prelims. That's all for today. I hope you really enjoyed the discussion. And if you did, please let us know in the comment section. All the very best. Thank you.